Good evening and welcome to Wednesday night Bible service, First Baptist Church in Azle. We're glad to have you tonight. Why don't we all stand and we'll do some praising and song. Phil, pay attention. This is Sunday, right?
Come on, Phil. You sure you don't want to come up here and help us out?
You can come up there.
No, okay. All right.
Coward. Through my disappointment, strife and discontentment, I cast my every care on the Lord. No matter what obsession, pain or deep depression, I'm standing on the solid rock. I'm standing on the rock of ages, safe from all the storm that rages, rich but not from Satan's wages, standing on the solid rock. Even though he's gone now, I don't feel alone now, 'cause I'm the Spirit of the Lord. Now with his word to guide me, from temptations hide me, I'm standing on the solid rock. I'm standing on the rock of ages, safe from all the storm that rages, rich but not from Satan's wages, standing on the solid rock. Now I'm pressing onward, each step leads me homeward. I'm trusting in my Savior day by day. And close is our relations, firm is its foundation, so on the solid rock I stay. I'm standing on the rock of ages, safe from all the storm that rages, rich but not from Satan's wages. I'm standing on the solid rock, standing on the solid rock. Amen. So did you hear that mini skirts are coming back in fashion?
Oh, are they?
Yeah, I heard that and I went straight to the dress store and got one and tried it on. And I pull and I stretch and I squirm and I pull and I stretch and I squirm and I got it up. But I can't figure out what to do with the other leg.
That's so bad. That was bad.
I'm sure glad he loves me like I am.
Me too.
Forgive me, Lord.
Here we go.
Jesus, oh Jesus, do you know him today? Do not turn him away. Oh Jesus, oh Jesus, without him, how lost I would be. Without him I could do nothing. Without him I'd surely fail. Without him I would be drifting like a ship without a sail.
Y'all sing this out.
Jesus, oh Jesus, do you know him today? Do not turn him away. Oh Jesus, oh Jesus, without him, how lost I would be. Without him I would be dying. Without him I'd be enslaved. Without him life would be hopeless. But with Jesus, thank God I am saved. Jesus, oh Jesus. Do you know him today? Do not turn him away. Oh, Jesus. Oh, Jesus. Without him, how lost I would be. Without him, how lost I would be. Amen. Have a seat.
Amen. Thank you, ladies. Whenever Ann tells a joke, I just kind of hold my breath and brace for impact. Open your Bibles tonight to 2 Samuel chapter 2. 2 Samuel chapter 2. If you've not been with us, we are going through a study of the Old Testament, verse by verse, chapter by chapter. Last week, we looked at the last chapter of 1 Samuel, and then the first chapter of 2 Samuel. And we saw that Saul has gone through his final battle. He didn't last very long at all. He was killed, and 3 of his 4 sons were killed also, including his son Jonathan, the dear friend of David. And that opens up, supposedly, the monarchy for David to assume the throne of king, as king. God has already ordained him to be the king. He's already anointed him through Samuel to be the king. And pretty much the entire country, if not the entire country, already knows that David is destined to be king. You would think it would be a shoo-in because it's David, but nothing is easy, and he ends up having to go through some battles for 2 years before he can actually become king of Israel. And when I say Israel, I mean all 12 tribes. He becomes a king of one tribe fairly quickly, but the others take about 2 years. So we're going to look at that tonight and see how that all ends and what happens with David here at the very end. 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1. Again, my usual disclaimer, this is the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is sometimes a little on the bloody side. So if you're squeamish, sorry. The good news is I don't have any pictures or video, so just the description out of the Bible. All right, 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1. In the course of time, David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah?" he asked. The Lord said, "Go up." David asked, "Where shall I go?" "To Hebron," the Lord answered. So David went up there with his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David also took the men who were with him, each with his family, and they settled in Hebron and its towns. Then the men of Judah came to Hebron, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. Now remember, David actually had 3 wives. The first wife was Michal, who is the daughter of Saul. She is still alive. But Saul, who wasn't very happy as he's been chasing David for 10 years before he has just now died and perished in battle, he had taken David's wife from him, Michal, and gave her to somebody else to marry. And so he has 2 wives left. I guess that's the advantage of having multiple wives. If you lose one, you got spares. And so he takes his 2 wives, and before the end of the evening, he's going to have a whole bunch more wives or concubines or however you want to refer to them. But interestingly enough, he's also going to reclaim Michal and get her back, even though it doesn't work too well. But we'll see that in the weeks to come. Verse 1, in the course of time, David inquired of the Lord. You notice that David, he's pretty spiritually attuned here. What do you do when you've been called to be king, anointed to be king, and you've run for 10 years from the current king that God has withdrawn his hand from? That king is now gone. Saul is deceased, and what's the next step? There's no rule book for kings here, and somebody's got to declare him king, and something has to happen, and he's not sure about what to do. which is understandable. I wouldn't know what to do either. And so David does exactly the right thing. He inquires of God and says, God, what do you want me to do? We come across decisions to make all the time in life, and we find ourselves thinking, what should I do? Should I go to this job or that job? Or what should I do with this money? Spend it or invest it? If I do, what should I do here or there? What about this relationship or this friendship or this place that I'll go to or whatever? And so often we make decisions in life and we forget to inquire of God. David was good at that, though, and so he just simply asked God, what should I do? And where should I go? And God told him to go where? Go to Hebron. David was Israel's lawful king, and he couldn't remain in Ziklag. That's where he's been for the last year and a half. But it was technically in enemy territory still. It was in Philistine territory. Again, it had been a Hebrew town, but the Philistines had taken it over. It's likely that Achish, who was the prince of the Philistine king, thought that David was still under his authority, but David knew that he must return to his own land and begin to reign over his own people. David was in the habit of seeking God's will when he had to make decisions, and so that's exactly what he does here. He was from Judah, David was, and God gave him permission to return to Judah and told him to live in Hebron, because Hebron is in Judah, which is one of the 12 tribes, was located about 25 miles from Ziklag. Now here in Texas, you can drive for 8 hours and not get through Texas. In Israel, you can walk almost across Israel because it's a tall, skinny country. It's not very wide at all. And so 25 miles is a very short distance for us, but you can go a long way in Israel from that distance. So he's about 25 miles away from Hebron. By moving there, David was back with his own people, but still under the shadow of the Philistines. And we're going to see in the next few weeks, God is going to use David to squish the Philistines for the last time. Hebron was important in Jewish history, for near the city was the tomb of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah. They're all buried right near Hebron. The city was the inheritance of Caleb, a man of stature in Jewish history. Abigail, one of his wives, remember, she had been married to a Calebite from this area, and David had inherited all of her property as her husband, and so he's got property near Hebron. Hebron was probably the most important city in the southern part of Judah. So David moved there with his men, and they lived in the town surrounding Hebron. For the first time in 10 years, David and his men were no longer fugitives. All right, the next verse, wherever I am. Verse 4. When David was told that it was the men of Jabesh, Gilead who had, let me restate that. When David was told that it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul, he sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead to say to them, "The Lord bless you for showing this kindness to Saul your master by burying him. May the Lord now show you kindness and faithfulness, and I too will show you the same favor because you have done this. Now then, be strong and brave, for Saul your master is dead, and the house of Judah has anointed me king over them." David was a man with a shepherd's heart who cared about his people. And one of his first concerns was the fate of Saul and his 3 sons who died with him. Remember when they were killed in battle, the next day the Philistines came, they beheaded Saul, and then they took his body and the body of his 3 sons, and they hung them on the wall of one of their cities. Was it Gaza, I believe? Was it Gaza? Anyone? Okay, since you don't know, I'm going to say it's Gaza. And so the men of Jabesh Gilead, Hebrews, found this out or heard of this or discovered this, and so they snuck down there at night to the city, the enemy city, deep in Philistine territory, to reclaim those bodies at the risk of peril. Now, again, normally in a secular setting, they could have been executed by the new king for having helped his enemy Saul, who Saul saw David as his enemy. But on the contrary, David loved Saul and wanted to honor and remember Saul, and so he considers this a tremendous kindness and respect that these men did this, and so he wants to reward them for it. Verse 8. Meanwhile, Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of Saul's army, had taken Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. That's right, I said it right the first time. Now, having said Mahanaim, if that's even close, I'm going to be sharing with you a lot of Hebrew words tonight, and I'm going to butcher half of them. So I ask for mercy. But I got that one right eventually. Verse 9, he made him king over Gilead, Asherai, and Jezreel, and also over Ephraim, Benjamin, and all Israel. So, let me read verse 10 first. Ishbosheth, son of Saul, was 40 years old when he became king over Israel. By the way, he's 10 years older than David, and he reigned for 2 years. The house of Judah, however, followed David. So the people of Judah, the one tribe of Judah, obeyed God's will and anointed David as their king. But Abner disobeyed the Lord and made Saul's one remaining son, Ishbosheth, the king over all the rest of Israel. Abner knew that David was God's choice. He was a gifted leader and a brave soldier, but he deliberately rebelled against the Lord and appointed Ishbosheth instead. Warren Wiersbe says, there's a modern touch to this scenario, for our political and religious worlds are populated by the same three kinds of people. We have weak people like Ishbosheth, who was a young man who was a very weak person. Remember, when Saul was out fighting his final battle, his 3 sons were there with him, including Jonathan, fighting valiantly to the death. All of his sons were there except one, Ishbosheth. Now, he's 40 years old. He's perfectly capable of fighting, and either he was very weak or he had a weak disposition or he was a coward. We don't know why he wasn't there, but it was odd that he was not there. And and we're going to find out he's a very weak leader. So Warren Wiersbe says there are 3 kinds of people. We have weak people like Ishbosheth, who get where they are because they have connections. That's what happened with Ishbosheth. They normally would never have made him king, but he happened to be the son of Saul. We have strong, selfish people like Abner, who know how to manipulate others for their own personal profit, and that's exactly what he does. We also have people of God like David, who are called, anointed, and equipped, but must wait for God's time before they can serve others. And so that's what we have here. Verse 11. The length of time David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. Now, he's king over all of Israel for about, he's king total for 40 years, I think. And so he is exclusively king in Judah for about 2 years. And then the next 5 years, he's king over the whole country, but he's still in Hebron. And then after that, he moves to the city of David there at Jerusalem. Verse 12, Abner, son of Ner, N-E-R, together with the men of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, left Mahanaim and went to Gibeon. Joab, son of Zeruiah, and David's men went out and met with them at the pool of Gibeon. One group sat down on the side of the pool and the other group on the other side. So you have 2 competing kings here. You have Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and you have David. And these are David and Saul's right-hand men, the leader of their armies. You've got Abner here, and then you have Joab. And so Abner and Joab are there. Now the kings aren't there. Neither one is there, David or Ishbosheth, but their army commanders are there. And each army commander has a group of guys, and they come to the well at the same time. Sounds like a movie scene, does it not? So they happen to be there at the well, and then trouble starts. Verse 13. Joab, son of Zeruiah, and David's men went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. One group sat down on one side of the pool and the other group on the other side. Then Abner said to Joab, let's have some of the young men get up and fight hand to hand in front of us. Let's have a little friendly wrestling match. All right then, let them do it, Joab said. There's a lot of testosterone in the air already. So they stood up and were counted off, 12 men for Benjamin, and Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and then 12 for David. Then each man grabbed his opponent by the head and thrust his dagger into his opponent's side, and they fell down together. So that place in Gibeon was called Helkath Hazurim. The battle that day was very fierce, and Abner and the men of Israel were defeated by David's men. So it started with these 12 men, but it grew beyond that very quickly. Now, the key actor in this drama, and this is according to the Bible Exposition Commentary, the key actor was Abner, Saul's cousin and the commander of his army. He had been with Saul all of these years. It was Abner who brought David to Saul after David killed Goliath way back 10 years prior, and who with Saul pursued David for 10 years. Abner was rebuked and humiliated by David. If you remember, when he failed to protect the king, remember at the cave, when David came out, he confronted Abner for not protecting the king. Or no, actually it was when he snuck into camp and Saul was fast asleep, and he took Saul's spear and his something else, his water, his Gatorade bottle. And so he scolded Abner for sleeping through all of that. And so it was humiliating for him. That was Abner. And Abner had no special love for David. The people of Israel honored David above Saul, and eventually the nation would learn that David was God's choice as king of Israel. But David already had a commander, Joab. So since David had a commander of his army, he didn't need Abner. So when he became king, what happened to Abner? What would he do with him? That's the question. Verse 18, the three sons of Zeruiah were there, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. No, it's Asahel. So you've got these three brothers. I want to call them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's snappier, but it's Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Yeah, that guy. Now, Asahel was as fleet-footed as a wild gazelle. What does that mean? He was fast. The kid could run. He was probably the younger of the three, and maybe that's why he could run so well, because he was young, but he was also the least able to protect himself or the least valiant or lethal soldier, but he was quicker than anybody else as well. He chased Abner, who was Saul's army commander. He chased Abner, turning neither to the right nor to the left as he pursued him. What does that mean? Why would he turn to the right or to the left? He ought to slow down and wait for his brothers to get there. But not having a lot of sense and being quick, he doesn't. He just goes straight for the guy. Verse 20, Abner looked behind him and asked, is that you, Asahel? It is, he answered. Then Abner said to him, turn aside to the right or to the left. In other words, he's saying what? Slow down. Take on one of the young men and strip him of his weapons. But Asahel would not stop chasing him. So he may not have been armed. So I don't know what he thought he was going to do when he caught up with Abner. But he's able to outrun his brothers, and he's able to outrun Abner. But again, he's got no strategy for when he catches up to Abner. Abner knows the kid. He knows his brothers. He knows his dad. And he doesn't want to kill him, frankly, because he knows who he is. In fact, he turned around and says, is that you? And he can pronounce his name better than I can, apparently. And he said, yeah, it's me. And he said, slow down. What are you doing? Verse 22. By the way, but he would not stop chasing him. Verse 22. Again, Abner warned Asahel, stop chasing me. Why should I strike you down? How could I look your brother Joab in the face? But Asahel refused to give up the pursuit, so Abner thrust the butt of his spear into Asahel's stomach, and the spear came out through his back. Well, that's not a good sign. He fell there and died on the spot, and every man stopped when he came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died. Well, that's a sad story, isn't it? Verse 24, but Joab and Abishai pursued Abner, and as the sun was setting, they came to the hill of Ammah near Giah and on the way to the wasteland of Gibeon. Then the men of Benjamin rallied behind Abner. They formed themselves into a group and took their stand on top of a hill. So the two brothers that are left, they see their dead brother and they keep chasing Abner. But before they can catch up with him, Abner has a group of people that rally to him, some other soldiers, and so they can't get at him. Verse 26, Abner called out to Joab, "Must the sword devour forever? Don't you realize that this will end in bitterness? How long before you order your men to stop pursuing their brothers?" Joab answered, "As surely as God lives, if he had not spoken, the men would have continued the pursuit of their brothers until morning." So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the men came to a halt. They no longer pursued Israel, nor did they fight anymore. So Joab does have the decency to plead with the younger brother, the faster brother, please slow down, please stop this. And he would not listen, and so he had to kill him in self-defense. He keeps running, and now he's not running alone. He's got a group of soldiers surrounding him to protect him, and they could probably overtake these other two guys and the others that are following along. And he calls out to them as he sees them down there and says, "Guys," says basically the same thing he said to their younger brother. "Stop. Please stop this. How long are you, why do you make us kill you?" Well, these guys are older and wiser, and they go, "Oh, okay, now that you've said something, yeah, we'll stop." Verse 29, all that night, Abner and his men marched through the Arabah. They crossed the Jordan, continued through the whole Bithron, and came to Mahanaim. Then Joab returned from pursuing Abner and assembled all his men. Besides Asahel, 19 of David's men were found missing. But David's men had killed 360 Benjamites who were with Abner. They took Asahel and burned him in his father's tomb at Bethlehem. Then Joab and his men marched all night and arrived at Hebron by daybreak. So that's chapter 2, and it really is setting up the story in chapter 3 about what happens and how God uses all of this to bring David to a unified monarchy in the whole nation of Israel. So look with me in chapter 3, verse 1. The war between the house of Saul and the house of David lasted a long time. It's interesting that it doesn't tell you what long time means, but the long time in this case isn't decades, it's actually 2 years. But there are a number of skirmishes that happened in that course of 2 years, and so it probably felt like a long time, even though it was actually just 2 years. David grew stronger and stronger while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. Sons were born to David in Hebron. Now here we go. Again, I'll do my best. His firstborn was Amnon, the son of Ahinoam of Jezreel. His second, Chileab, the son of Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. The third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. The fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith. That's a beautiful name, Haggith. The fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital. And the sixth, Ithream, the son of David's wife, Eglah. That's a name you don't hear much either, Eglah, E-G-L-A-H, Eglah. These were born to David in Hebron. So for David, his family was increasing, and the king now had a growing harem like any other Eastern monarch. Of course, David's son Solomon would go far beyond what his father had done or what any Jewish king would do. But David moved to Hebron with 2 wives, and now he had 6 sons by 6 wives, 6 different wives. Polygamy started with Lamech, a descendant of Cain in Genesis chapter 4. That was the first one who had multiple wives and was tolerated in Israel, even though technically it was forbidden to Israel's kings, and that rule came all the way back from Deuteronomy chapter 17, before they even had kings. But David and Solomon just ignored that and went ahead and had lots of wives. Amnon, David's firstborn, would rape his half-sister Tamar, and we're going to see that in the weeks to come. And he would be murdered by Tamar's full brother Absalom, who would be killed while trying to take the kingdom from his father in chapters 14 through 18 coming up. The fact that Absalom was related to royalty on his mother's side might have encouraged his crusade for the kingdom. No doubt David's marriage to Maacah was politically motivated so that David would have an ally near Ishbosheth. Chileab is called Daniel in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, called by a different name. And during David's final illness, Adonijah would try to capture the throne and would be executed by Solomon. We're going to find that out in 1 Kings chapter 1 and 2. We know nothing about Shephatiah and his mother Abitai, and Ithream and his mother Eglah. After relocating his capital in Jerusalem, David took even more wives and concubines and had even more sons born to him. So, a lot of sons and a lot of problems with all of those wives and sons. Verse 6. During the war between the house of Saul and the house of David, Abner had been strengthening his own position in the house of Saul. Now, Saul had a concubine named Rizpah, daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why did you sleep with my father's concubine?" So he accused the right-hand man, the captain of the army, the very one that crowned him king. He accused him of sleeping with his dad's concubine. Of course, dad is dead, Saul, but he accused him of doing that. Now, that was a shameful thing to have done if he's guilty, but he takes offense of that. We don't know if he did it or not. Probably did, but we don't know that, but he does make that accusation. Abner doesn't take that very well. Verse 8, Abner was very angry because of what Ishbosheth said, and he answered, "Am I a dog's head on Judah's side? This very day, I'm loyal to the house of your father Saul and to his family and friends. I haven't handed you over to David. Yet now you accuse me of an offense involving this woman? May God deal with Abner," that's himself, "be it ever so severely, if I do not do for David what the Lord promised him on oath, and transfer the kingdom of the house of Saul and establish David's throne over Israel and Judah from Dan to Beersheba." Now, here's what he's saying here. He gets mad at Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, he's crowned king, and he says, "Who am I? Some nothing that you would make an accusation like that to me?" He said, "I've got a good mind to turn you over to David, who," and he admits this here, "who's the very one that that God has determined to be king in the first place." In other words, Abner already knew that David was supposed to be king, already knew that was what God wanted, and he's been doing this anyway. Even though he knew this was wrong, he knew David was supposed to be king. And so he confronts Ishbosheth. Now, verse 11, Ishbosheth did not dare to say another word to Abner because he was afraid of him. Then Abner's a pretty tough guy. Abner sent messengers on his behalf to say to David, "Whose land is it? Make an agreement with me, and I will help you bring all Israel over to you." "Good," said David. "I'll make an agreement with you. But I demand one thing of you. Do not come into my presence unless you bring Michal, daughter of Saul, when you come see me." Again, that was his first wife he got after he defeated Goliath. Do you remember that? So when he defeated Goliath, the prize was Saul's daughter. She didn't want him. Do you remember that? She wasn't big on marrying David. But he had this other daughter that liked David. In fact, she loved David, and her name was Michal. But Saul knew that David wouldn't take her either because he wouldn't accept the other daughter. So Saul decided to make a challenge to David. And do you remember what the challenge was? Yeah, go into Philistine territory, get me 100 foreskins. In other words, kill 100 Philistines, and bring me that. And if you do that, if you win that challenge, accept that challenge, I'll give you my daughter Michal in marriage. Well, that appealed to David, so he did that, brought in those foreskins, and he got this wife. So they're happily married, and she protects and defends David from her own father. And while David is on the run, Saul gets mad, gives his daughter to somebody else to marry him. Unfortunately for David, she's now been with this guy for years, probably has kids with him, and she probably is in love with him. And certainly we're going to find out he's in love with her second husband. So this is a complicated family situation here. You think your family's complicated. My goodness. Okay, so David says, all right, you want to make a deal with me. I'll make a deal, but here's the condition of the deal. You bring my wife back. I want my wife back. And so that's the deal. Verse 14, then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Saul, demanding, give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for the price of 100 Philistine foreskins. In other words, I want her fair and square. I want her back. So Ishbosheth gave orders and had her taken away from her husband Paltiel, son of Laish. Her husband, however, went with her, weeping behind her all the way to Barum. Then Abner said to him, go back home. So he went back. Okay. Bless his heart. Verse 17, Abner conferred with the elders of Israel and said, for some time you have wanted to make David your king. Now do it. For the Lord promised David, by my servant, this is Abner speaking, by my servant David, I will rescue my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of their enemies. Abner is quoting the prophecy of God. He knows it well. He knows precisely that God is determined that David will be king. And yet, he opposed that and supported Ishbosheth as king anyway, knowing that was against God's will. Now, Abner is not a dumb guy. He has to know that that's going to fail. So the question is, why? Why would he do that? Why do we do things that we know are opposed to God's plan and we do it anyway? We're just fallen people. We don't have any sense. It doesn't make any kind of logical sense. Abner knows better. He knows it's not going to go well for him, and yet he does it anyway. It makes you scratch your head. So now Abner is saying, okay, can't fight it anymore. The gig is up. I've lost faith in Ishbosheth. David is the guy. Verse 19. Abner also spoke to the Benjamites in person. Then he went to Hebron to tell David everything that Israel and the whole house of Benjamin wanted to do. When Abner, who had 20 men with him, came to David at Hebron, David prepared a feast for him and his men. Then Abner said to David, let me go at once and assemble all Israel for my lord the king, so that they may make a compact with you, and that you may rule over all that your heart desires. So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. Now, if the chapter stopped right there, boom, right there, it's time to have the party. They're going to have a big crowning ceremony. All 12 tribes have representatives there. Everybody applauds and let the feast and the food begin. It's awesome. But that's not what happens. Now, that's agreement between David and Abner. They're the guys that ought to work fine. But do you remember the three brothers who were running after Abner? And Abner defends himself and kills one of the brothers. The two brothers that are left just can't let it go. All right, verse 22. Just then David's men and Joab returned. Now Joab is one of the brothers. Returned from a raid and brought with them a great deal of plunder. But Abner was no longer with David in Hebron because David had sent him away, and he had gone in peace. When Joab and all the soldiers with him arrived, he was told that Abner, son of Ner, had come to the king, and that the king had sent him away, and that he had gone in peace. So Joab went to the king and said, "What have you done? Look, Abner came to you. Why did you let him go? Now he's gone. You know Abner, son of Ner. He came to deceive you and observe your movements and find out everything you're doing." So obviously he doesn't trust him, trust issues. Joab then left David and sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the well of Sirah. But David did not know it. So they sent guys after Abner, not to kill him, to bring him back. Abner willingly comes back with them, assuming that David wants to say something else to him. But David doesn't have any idea he's being brought back. Verse 26, but David did not know it. Verse 27, now when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into the gateway, as though to speak to him privately. This is one of the two brothers. And there, to avenge the blood of his brother Asahel, Joab stabbed him in the stomach, and he died. Wow. Ugh. Well, everything about the death of Abner was wrong. Now, Abner was not guiltless in all of this. He should not have supported and endorsed Ishbosheth. It's true. But he has made peace with David. He's on his way to take care of things. If he's keeping his word, the whole monarchy is going to be united under David. It's all going to be good. And the brothers go out for revenge and kill him. The two brothers knew what their king wanted, yet they deliberately put their own interests ahead of that of the kingdom. Asahel had been pursuing Abner on the battlefield, so he was another casualty of war, but the death of Abner was murder. Hebron was a city of refuge, interestingly, I don't know if you know that, a sanctuary where an accused murderer could get a fair trial, but the two brothers never gave the elders in Hebron a chance to hear the case. Abner killed Asahel in self-defense. But when Joab and Abishai killed Abner, it was pure revenge, and Abner never had an opportunity to defend himself. Asahel's death occurred in broad daylight where everybody could witness what happened, but Abner was deceived and led into the shadows. Abishai had accompanied David into Saul's camp and had seen him refuse to kill his father-in-law. So he knew that David would not have approved of the murder of Saul's general. That's sad. I find this fascinating that God puts this in the Bible. I'm thankful, but I find it interesting that God decided to go ahead and put this in there. So we know that David's path to kingship, even anointed by God, chosen by God, destined by God, still his path to kingship was not an easy one. Verse 28. Later, when David heard about this, he said, I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord concerning the blood of Abner, son of Ner. May his blood fall on the head of Joab and upon his father's house. May Joab's house never be without someone who has a running sore or leprosy, who leans on a crutch, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks food. Now, what does he mean by that? He's putting a curse on his house, basically. May your house be cursed. Verse 30. Joab and his brother Abishai murdered Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel in the battle of Gibeon. Then David said to Joab and all the people with him, tear your clothes. And this is what he said to the very guy who killed him. Tear your clothes and put on sackcloth. That's what they do in mourning. And walk in mourning in front of Abner. So even though he had murdered him, he then made Joab and his brother tear their clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourn in front of the very guy that they just murdered. Isn't that interesting? King David himself walked behind the bier. They buried Abner in Hebron, and the king wept aloud at Abner's tomb. All the people wept also. The king sang this lament for Abner. Now, before I read the lament, did you catch this? David writes a lament for Abner. Now, why would he do that? I mean, they weren't buddies. This is the very guy that David had mocked. When David took the spear of Saul, why is he writing a lament? Well, the other 10 tribes or 11 tribes need to hear that David is clean from this, that he didn't murder Abner. And so he's being pretty smart here. But I also think that David's pretty tenderhearted because he had made peace with Abner, and Abner ends up dead. So here's the lament, verse 33. Should Abner have died as the lawless die? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. You fell as one falls before wicked men. And all the people wept over him again. Then they all came and urged David to eat something while it was still day. But David took an oath, saying, May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun sets. Listen to this part. All the people took note and were pleased. They see that David is genuinely distressed. Indeed, and this is really important, everything the king did pleased them. So on that day, all the people in all Israel knew that the king had no part in the murder of Abner, son of Ner. Then the king said to his men, Do you not realize that a prince and a great man has fallen in Israel this day? And today, though I am the anointed king, I am weak, and all these sons of Zeruiah are too strong for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil deeds. Well, I wouldn't want to be Joab, because that's the evildoer. He's talking about him and his brother. Now, I'll leave you with this. Verse 36, all of this really culminates in verse 36. In the midst of the tragedy, all the people took note and were pleased. Indeed, everything the king did pleased them. Your life and my life is a culmination of decisions that we make. Not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands of decisions that we make. Our life financially is the result of thousands of financial decisions that we make. Little decisions, whether to go to Taco Casa or make a sandwich. Every little decision that we make affects our life financially. If you eat at Taco Casa every day, it affects your financial life and your medical life as well. But we make decisions financially. We make decisions relationally. Thousands of decisions, who to befriend and how to invest in those friendships. How much of our time do we spend with each of those friends and family members? We make all kinds of decisions, thousands of decisions every year spiritually as well. How much time do I spend in prayer? How much time do I spend in God's Word? How much time do I spend with God's people or in God's house in worship? We make all of these decisions, and it's a small decision each Sunday as we roll over in bed and think, I'll go to church. I won't go to church today. I'll go back next Sunday. Or if we think, I won't have a quiet time today, I'll have it tomorrow. Or we end up reading extra in God's Word and being inspired by it or spending extra time in prayer. Every decision that we make is an investment, pro or con, to our life, spiritually, emotionally, relationally, and financially. It is the culmination of who we become in our life and where we are in our life. If you make a whole lot of bad decisions, you end up being in a bad place in your life, spiritually, financially, relationally, physically. But the opposite is true as well. Every investment that you make, no matter where it is in your life, and whether it's physical or spiritual or financial or whatever it is, every investment that we make, every good decision that we make, every good decision that we make in our relationships makes stronger cords of relationships, brings us closer and closer to those that are around us and those that we love. Our life is a culmination of all of those thousands of decisions. I say it to say David had this unusual ability to make good decisions. Some people just make better decisions in life than others. So if you go home tonight and you think, well, my life is a shambles, it's my ex-spouse's fault, or it's my children's fault, or it's my parents' fault, they just weren't good parents, or my neighbor's fault, or my boss's fault, or whoever you want to blame, if all of the areas in your life are messed up, it's probably not their fault. It's probably the decisions that we make. On the other hand, here's the good news. Even though you may have a bad spouse, or bad parents, or bad kids, or bad boss, all of those other thousands of decisions will more than make up for that, and you can have a blessed life. So how do you arrive at all of those great decisions? How did David arrive at those great decisions? We already saw. He regularly went to God in prayer and said, should I go here? Should I do this? Should I make that decision? And David's willingness to go to God on a regular basis made all the difference in the world. All right, any comments or questions about those two chapters before we, yes?
That's such a great point. I was going to ask a question. You just answered it perfectly. Abner made the suggestion, we'll give in, have this back. His men lost. Why did Asahel chase him? It was a bad decision.
You're right. That was a bad decision to chase that guy, especially, I picture him as a skinny kid because that's why he would have been so fast. And clearly was a poor decision. And as he looks down and sees that spear through him, that was the last thought going through his mind, I'm sure. Oh, that was a bad decision. Bless his heart. We do things just like that, and it results in pain. That's a good point. Anybody else? All right, let's take, yes, right back there. Oh, yes, so that would have been a sign of that, and who knows? But that's exactly right. That would have been a sign that he wanted the king's throne, and maybe he was using Ishbosheth in some sort of personal desire to take the throne. Yeah, who knows? But that's a good point. All right, let's take a look at our prayer sheet for the week, and then we'll dismiss for the night.